Hey everyone, welcome back to Portal of Wisdom. I'm back today with another story for you. So if you're new to the channel, like and subscribe if you like lost treasure stories. And now on to today's topic. Today's topic is about the lost Captain Dick mine. And this story was one I sat on for a little while because I had one source, but it wasn't the best source, and I have come across a couple more sources, and now I felt it was a better time to put the story together and present a few different details from different stories. So the first source comes out of a 1941 issue of Desert Magazine by the famous lost treasure writer John D. Mitchell. And this was the one that I've had for a while, and there are just some details when a story is written in 1941 that aren't so politically correct, and it can be a little bit challenging to do some of those stories if there's a lot of that kind of stuff in there. So anyhow, that's what led me to sit on it for a while, but I'm kind of glad I did because I have a lot more to share with you because there are a couple other stories that present some different sides to this story and maybe make more of a complete picture of what may be going on here. So as far as John D. Mitchell states in his story in Desert Magazine, Captain Dick was a Native American man that lived in Northeast California nearly 100 years prior to the printing of the 1941 article. And he lived up in the mountains on Owl Creek or near Owl Creek. And at some point, he started appearing in town with large pieces of rich gold ore, and he would trade it for groceries and other goods and I believe alcohol and various other things that he needed. And then he would disappear back up into the mountains for a while. And I believe the mountains we're talking about are the Warner Mountains. So if anyone ever cornered him and asked him where he got the gold, he would just tell them, quote, "heap far over the mountains," end quote, and would say nothing else. So people generally believe that he was mining a rich ledge or had a mine somewhere up in the mountains near Eagle Peak in the Warner Mountains, high up in the pass area between Owl Creek and Pine Valley. So this is where people believe that he lived, or approximately his location, and assuming that his mine or his gold find was probably somewhere around there. And it was said that Captain Dick and his Native American wife, they both lived up there, and many locals had searched near these areas and had never found anything. Then after the locals would quit looking for gold or his particular gold location up there and they would give up, then before too long Captain Dick would show up again in town with a new bag full of gold, and he would cash it in for things that he needed, and at times it was said he would even be so generous as to give a young child a small piece of gold ore and tell him to go exchange it for food for his family. So in the Desert Magazine story, it states that eventually two miners declared to all their miner friends that they would follow Captain Dick to his gold discovery location or die trying to do so. And the two miners were said to never be seen again. They never returned to their homes down in town. And it was said that they trailed Captain Dick up into the mountains, or maybe their friends saw them do so and then lost sight of them, and then they had no idea what happened to these two miners after that point. But eventually Captain Dick returned to town, and then he was arrested and questioned on their disappearance. And he never talked to the police about anything that had happened, or he kept his mouth shut, I guess. And And it was said in this article that a little bit later on, a vigilante group broke into the jail and took him and hung him. And at this point, then only his Native American wife was still alive. But when she passed on, there went the secret of this lost gold mine. But this was not the end of the story as far as the magazine article goes. There was a sheep herder in the area, and he was in town in one of the drinking establishments, and he had a little too much to drink, and he let it slip as he was talking to some friends that one time he was driving his sheep through the pass near Pine Valley and Owl Creek, and he saw Captain Dick emerge from a hole in the mountainside with a small bag in his hand. And after Captain Dick emerged out of this hole, he looked around to see if anyone had seen him, and he placed a large flat rock over the opening, and then he climbed down the mountain. So Captain Dick apparently had not seen the sheep herder quietly watching him from afar. So the next day, the sheep herder said that he took a candle and he went into the hole to explore. And inside, he saw 2 human skulls hanging from pegs in the wall. And he noticed that the walls were glittering with gold in various places. So he quickly chipped off a few pieces of gold from the wall, and then he got the heck out of this death chamber. So the sheep herder told the listeners that he got about $1,400 from the gold once he had cashed it in. And then the sheep herder was said to disappear from a time, for a time, and then he did eventually return with some gold to last him for a while. So it appeared that he knew what he was talking about and knew where this location was, according to the story. And he was said to do this a couple of times where he disappeared into the mountains and returned to town with some additional gold ore and cashed it in. And apparently the sheep herder knew that with Captain Dick and his wife both being no longer here, he felt safe to go into this tunnel and carve out some more gold ore whenever he felt he needed it. But after a couple of times of this, and his friends seeing this and understanding that he actually did know where this gold location or gold find was, then they became curious as to the location of this particular gold ore. And of course, they're continuing to hang out at the drinking establishments with this sheep herder. And it is said that one day they're all sitting there, and the sheep herder had run out of his gold and out of his money, and he was going to need to make another trek up into the hills to get some more gold so he could have money for his daily needs. And there was a newer gentleman in their group that this sheep herder asked this gentleman for a loan in the meantime, and apparently this gentleman didn't trust that he knew where there was gold up in the mountains. Maybe he thought he was just telling a tall tale or whatever the case happened to be, but this particular gentleman didn't loan him any money, and it's hard to say if any of the other friends sitting around also didn't have money, because if you're sitting in a lot of drinking establishments, you're probably going through a lot of money. So that may be why he asked the newer friend. Maybe he knew the newer friend had some money, but he wouldn't loan him any money. So it was said that the sheep herder knew that he had to make a quick trip up into the mountains to get some more gold so that he could have some more money to last him for a while. And at that point, he took off up into the hills, and I believe it was said that no one ever saw the sheep herder again. So this newer friend that had rejected giving him the loan, and the other friends that had been around for a while, it was said they all went up into the mountains, somewhat in the general area that they knew that he would go up into, and they looked for him and looked all over, and they never found him. So it appeared that no one in the friend group had done anything to him because they were looking for him, and maybe by the point they realized that he really did have access to some gold, then next thing you know, the sheep herder disappeared, so they never had an opportunity to determine where this particular gold ore location was. So that's the story as it appeared in an old issue of Desert Magazine in 1941. But like I said, there is a whole other story when it comes to Captain Dick, or Holden Dick is his real name. And I found this story from the files of the Lassen County Historical Society. And this story seems to present a whole different side of Holden, or Captain Dick. And it states that he was, of course, a Native American man, and he was of the Pitt River tribe, but that he was actually a bad man, and he spent time with a lot of other bad men, and the tribe was also not too fond of him either. And I believe the Lassen County Historical Society details all come from a newspaper article in the 1880s. So it goes back quite a ways, and it gives a lot of details. So it states that he was fond of wealth, and Captain Dick would try to get it any way that he could, even if it was not legal. And one of these wealth shortcuts that he took, according to this article, is that in March of 1881, it was said that he hijacked a gold ore shipment that was coming from Nevada that was on its way, I believe, heading to Sacramento, California. And it was heading through Modoc County in Northern California. And this freight wagon was said to have 3 guards. And Captain Dick was supposedly able to kill 2 of the guards before anything knew what happened. So it sounded like an ambush situation. And then the driver of the horse team, he quickly surrendered. So the masked attacker allowed him to walk away through the woods, while the masked man escaped with the load of gold ore and the wagon and the horses. And it was said that Holden Dick, Captain Dick, headed into the South Warner Mountains, where it was thought that he had a hidden cave. And this story mentions that the towns that he would bring some of this gold ore in to cash it in were Susanville and Alturas, and he would tell stories occasionally of his mining claim. So apparently he made a claim of having a mine as a front for where he acquired this gold ore, and that was his excuse. So at the time, a few people were said to have suspected him of robbery, but there was never any evidence, and also, no one could find his supposed mine. And then a couple years later, in 1883, Captain Dick was suspected of killing a Chinese man for the $759 that he had carried. But again, there was no evidence. So nothing happened in that case either. In September of 1883, according to this article, a man named Samuel Shaw, who had a tiny little cabin on Madeline Plains near the mouth of a ravine, and apparently this is close to the Warner Mountains. He has this little cabin. It's near the mouth of a ravine. There is a little spring coming down from above, and so he's near this water. And it's said that this man, Samuel Shaw, his nearest neighbor was George Bailey, and he was about 2 miles away. But Sam would usually have the company of some Native American families that would camp very close by. Probably likely because of the spring and close by fresh water, maybe game and other things like that. So Sam apparently had an issue of some kind with another neighbor named Jackson Leafer or Looper, who had argued frequently with Sam. And so on September 29th of that year, 1883, someone had killed Sam, and suspicion fell on the neighbor that he had been quarreling with for a long time, this Jackson Leafer. And shortly after that, Jackson had disappeared after Sam's death, and Sam's death actually was not discovered for a couple of weeks later by a native woman who went to check on him, and she discovered his lifeless body full of buckshot and found the body minus a head. So the missing head also confused the sheriff, and Jackson was found much later in Philadelphia, and the sheriff went to get him and bring him back, but he really had no evidence that Jackson did anything, and Jackson claimed he had an alibi. But after Jackson was back, it was said that Captain Dick's wife had told Jackson that Captain Dick and another man named Billy were actually the culprits. And supposedly Captain Dick's wife had told Jackson this because Jackson also did not like this Samuel Shaw gentleman. So she probably felt he could keep a secret, or she wanted to let him know that I know you didn't like this guy, and my husband, Captain Dick, and another man named Billy were the ones that did away with him. But what ended up happening instead was that Jackson ended up telling the sheriff, probably because he wanted to make sure the sheriff was off of his back. So he told the sheriff what he was told by Captain Dick's wife, and the sheriff started investigating those two. And on Thursday, February 12th of 1885, Sheriff Christopher Richford of Modoc County arrested Holden Dick and another man named Charlie Fox, and they were placed in jail in Alturas on a Sunday evening. Or I believe it was on a Thursday. And then on the Sunday evening, a couple days later, Holden, or Captain Dick, was moved to Susanville, which is a bigger town further south. And it doesn't state why Charlie Fox was arrested or exactly why Captain Dick or Holden Dick was moved to Susanville. Maybe they needed to house them in a bigger city or with a bigger jail. I'm not really sure on that. It doesn't state. So this is obviously quite a few months or over a year after Sam was killed that some of these details came to light. So we also don't really know when Captain Dick's wife told this Jackson gentleman the details, or that her husband and a friend was the actual culprits. But while in Susanville, Captain Dick went on trial, and he readily confessed to the murder. And he said a man named A.B. Perry told Captain Dick, after a lot of whiskey that they had been drinking, that he knew where they could make $800, or where he could make $800, and that was by killing Sam. And he told Captain Dick, if you would help me, then Perry said he would give him $30. So obviously they weren't splitting things equal, but anyhow, so A.B. Perry appears to likely be the man named Billy. Maybe Billy was his middle name, A. Billy Perry or something. I don't know, but anyhow, so Billy was apparently offered $800 by a white man to kill Sam, but the man wanted the head as proof that the deed was done. So Captain Dick and this A.B. Perry person, they rode off and they did the deed and they cut the head off, and then they left the dead gentleman Sam in his bed, and they left with the head. And it was said, or Captain Dick said, after many miles of riding, they did not like having this head with them, and they stopped and buried it in some rocks, or tried to dig a hole a bit and covered it with rocks. And then they split up at that point, and A.B. Perry was said to head back to his home in South Fork. And so after hearing this story, the sheriff then went to where the head was buried, and he didn't find the head there, but he did find the lower jawbone there. So he had been directed where to go there. I don't know if they took Captain Dick out of jail and had him show them where or whatever, but anyhow, the head was missing. Maybe some animals got to it, but the jawbone was still there. So there was also some buckshot that was in the hole. And so I guess at this point it probably corroborated the story that Captain Dick told. And then the sheriff went on to A.B. Perry's house, but it was discovered that he was found dead about 12 days after Sam Shaw's murder. So I guess some time had passed, and then some locals there had let them know that this gentleman had been dead for, quite a while. So there was no A.B. Perry to bring to justice for this, and there was nothing ever said on whether the guys ever even got paid for doing away with this Sam Shaw gentleman. So they may not have if A.B. Perry ended up also dead a few days later. So Captain Dick was sentenced to death, but he appealed, and he was waiting to speak to an attorney while he sat in the town jail in Susanville. And another murderer named Olivas was sitting in jail with Captain Dick too. And then on a Saturday night, January 23rd of 1886, the Susanville, California Masonic Lodge had its annual banquet and dance at the Johnson House Hotel. Even the sheriff and the deputies were there. And while this was going on, Holden Dick's wife, or Captain Dick's wife, she was also living in Susanville, probably to be close to her husband while they awaited this appeal. So she heard a commotion at the jail, and she ran to the hotel to get the sheriff and the deputies, who were all in attendance of this party. And when they arrived at the jail, they discovered that the jail door had been broken down, or a sledgehammer had been used on it to break it open, and that Captain Dick and Olivas were hanging from cross beams in the woodshed out back, and they were no longer alive. So the story was in newspapers around the country, and this article even references it being in newspapers as far away as the Times-Union in Brooklyn, New York. So it sounds like the story made it around the U.S. So that was according to the Lassen County Historical Society and what was in the newspaper at that time. I found another account of this story with only a few details varying from what the Lassen County Historical Society said. But on this account, it states that after the robbery of the gold ore-bearing freight wagon, that Captain Dick drove the wagon north and buried the ore on the western slope of the Warner Mountains. And this account also states that Sam Shaw was a miner that kept badgering Captain Dick for more details about his mine, not knowing that his ore came from a robbery. So Captain Dick was said to have shot him. It also states that the authorities eventually figured out that Captain Dick's gold ore did not come from a mine due to some of the characteristics of the ore, and figured out that it likely came from the freight wagon robbery years earlier. This source also said that the authorities determined that the ore was most likely hidden in a cave that Captain Dick lived in, or nearby a cave that he lived in, because he seemed to have easy access to the ore. And the cave that he lived in was said to be located in one of the many canyons that extend from Eagle Peak on the western slope of the southern Warner Mountains. It also said that he had constructed a rock wall at the entrance to the cave, but after all these years, that very well could have fallen down. They thought that the cave would be likely at a lower elevation to be more manageable to live in and not so brutal in the winter, as Captain Dick was said to live here year round. So these were the accounts of Captain Dick, or Holden Dick, and his possible gold mine or gold cache, which very likely could still be up in these northeastern California mountains. It appears the story is true, as it was published in papers and Captain Dick confessed before his death. I wasn't so sure about it when I only had the one story from John D. Mitchell from Desert Magazine. But as I found the Lassen Historical Society details mentioning the newspaper article details, and then at that point I knew we had a good story for the channel. And also because as I read the first story, I found it was written in kind of an anti-Native American way, and a lot of those old stories can be. And I sat on the story for a while, not sure if it was advisable to tell the story. You have to do a bit of cleaning up of details when a lot of things are written in a derogatory fashion towards any other ethnicity. But as I found the other sources and found a lot of details to help determine that the story was true, and I felt that I could determine a lot more of the details and how to tell the story. I mean, maybe Captain Dick wasn't the best man, and I didn't necessarily want to go by just one source on that. So as I had more details, more stuff that came out of the papers and stuff like that, I felt it painted a better picture of the entire situation. Now, obviously, we still don't know for sure if this was the gold ore from the wagon, and we don't know how much of that ore, if so, that he had cashed in, or if there was still a good cache of it somewhere, or if he possibly did have a gold mine up in these mountains. But either way, whether there's a gold mine or there's a gold cache of this stolen ore cached somewhere, it seems like there very well could be some gold remaining up in those mountains from Captain Dick. So at this point, I was about ready to call it good or call it a video, and it dawned on me that this may be one of those perfect examples of how stories change over time. When John D. Mitchell wrote the story in 1941, he may not have had access to the newspaper articles from the 1880s, being as, that would have been 80 years prior. So he may have gone by what some people in the area had told him and what the story had migrated to become at that point, and he assumed that the details he got were legit and correct. And he had certain things right, of course. That Captain Dick did get hung at the end of the story, and he did have gold that he was bringing into town and cashing in, and people in the area, according to the newspaper article, had thought that he had a mine up there, or maybe some people thought that he had something to do with the ore wagon that had gotten hijacked. And so there was a dispute, probably for a long time, amongst the townspeople on where the gold came from and where it may be even after Captain Dick's death. So you don't really know how the sheep herder came into it, if someone had made up that part of the story, or if there was a sheep herder that did see Captain Dick come out of a cave. Now, whether that was just his cave that he lived in or whatever, that could have been the case too, and maybe there wasn't any gold inside of that cave specifically, or it could be that that situation came about after Captain Dick died and someone went into the cave and did find maybe some gold that he had in there, but maybe he had the rest of the cash buried somewhere else and maybe kept some handy. So it's hard to say, but it seems like we know what the original story was from the newspapers, and we know what the story had migrated to become about 80 years later when it was printed in Desert Magazine in 1941. So there was a lot of time there for the story to change a bit, and you can see how a lot of the initial details still carried through the story, but some little side offshoot stories were a little bit different. And as far as side offshoot stories, I'm kind of talking about the sheep herder and the fact that John D. Mitchell doesn't mention anything at all about the robbery of the gold ore coming through the area and how the townspeople suspected that was Captain Dick. So some parts of stories change or get dropped off, or new details can get added, and I know we've talked about this before, and this happens in a lot of those stories. And this could be a perfect example of that, where the overall effect of the story of Captain Dick having some gold, whether it came from a mine or it came from a robbery and he cached it somewhere, that appears to all be true. And the fact that when he went on trial and he got convicted and then the vigilantes came after him after that, it appears all those things are true. There might just be a few details in the middle that migrated or varied depending on who was telling the story or how long ago that story had been told. And nowadays, with the access to the internet and a lot of old files and old newspapers and things like that, I'm sure John D. Mitchell didn't have access to that stuff in 1941. So you probably had to go by some of the oldest people in the area that maybe knew some details or knew what the story was that they heard, and had to go by that. So anyhow, that appears to be hopefully all of the details of the Captain Dick mine or gold cache story. There could be more details out there, but hopefully we found enough sources and details to kind of paint a little bit bigger picture. And of course, it still is up to your opinion whether he had a hidden gold mine up there or whether he was responsible for the robbery of the ore wagon, because it didn't really give a lot of proof as to the gold that he cashed in, why they thought that it may have matched the ore wagon gold. But ores can vary with different percents of different minerals in them, so I don't know if that's how they thought, if it had a certain percentage of a certain mineral or metal in it along with the gold, and they thought that's very similar to this gold ore that got hijacked or whatever back a few years prior, and if they kind of put two and two together at that point or what the situation was. I wish there was more detail on that. And if there was more detail on that, we may know that, well, he didn't have a mine. He just had a wagon load of gold ore that he robbed from somewhere else. But even in a case like that, he could definitely could have had it buried in the mountains somewhere, and he would just go for some of it when he needed it, and maybe he planned on it lasting him the rest of his life. So, anyhow, could still be there. But that is the story of the Captain Dick gold mine or gold cache. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting the channel, and catch us in our next story. Thank you.